Hey guys, tonight we are slipping into a world older than pyramids, softer than linen, and somehow still scented with herbs you can't pronounce. You're waking slowly by the Nile, not the touristy bit with ferries and postcards, but a quiet bend where reeds whisper and fishermen hum, off-key in the dawn. Your bed is made of woven papyrus, your head smells faintly of sesame oil, and your wig, yes, you wear one now, is definitely askew. The air is already warming, not hot, yet just enough to make the clay floor gently radiate through your toes. From somewhere beyond your mud brick wall, you hear it a steady, slow thunk. Not a dramatic war drum, or a shout. More like someone chopping cucumbers with the intent of making a life choice about it. You follow the sound. Outside, the day stretches golden across the river. People are stirring some hauling baskets of date fruit, others rinsing cloth in the shallows. The sun's not fully up, but it's enough to squint. You pass the weaving hut, where last night's gossip still lingers like smoke. You step over a sleepy goat, and then you see her. She stands alone in the clearing near a flat-topped stone, polished smooth by years of use. Her robe is indigo-faded, frayed, and beautiful. Her arms are lean, her fingers stained with soot and resin, and her skin is marked. Small black dots run in lines across her wrists, her ankles, her temples. They curve like constellations over her joints. There is a gentle symmetry to them, as if her body once held a secret map and decided not to keep it private. She looks up and nods. You don't speak, not yet, but something about her gaze, calm, tired, amused, tells you this is someone who's seen a lot of stomach aches, and maybe a few ghosts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. She is a healer, not the kind with scrolls and formulas, although she knows more about anatomy than most men with official titles, but the kind whose knowledge is inked in her hands and pressed into skin. You're told she's known in at least 7 villages along the Nile, not just for helping sick children or easing fevers, but for her tattoos. Yes, tattoos. Only you don't call them that here. The word doesn't exist yet. These are marks, signs, remedies etched not in air or water, but flesh, each one precise, repeated, deliberate. She gestures for you to sit near the flat stone. It's smooth and warm under your thighs. She hands you a cup of something that tastes like mud, but in a comforting way. It's made from boiled herbs and crushed fig pits. You'll grow to like it. Or pretend to. You watch as she prepares a new batch of pigment. She uses a tiny mortar worn smooth with years of use. Charcoal, ash, some kind of tree sap. And yes, what you think is a pinch of red ochre. You lean in. She smirks and hands you a pestle. Apparently you're helping now. As you grind, she hums. Not a song. More like a breath with rhythm. She starts laying out her tools, a delicate thorn for piercing a bone comb, for guiding a tiny shard of obsidian for, well, something you hope won't involve your spleen. Every item looks hand-carved, oiled, cherished. There's no rush here, no sterile gloves or clipboards, just the slow ritual of readiness. A patient approaches, a man in his 40s maybe, though time here measures more by sunburn and stories than years. He limps slightly, wincing as he settles down. The healer touches his knee. Gently, her fingers find spots. Press pause, note the breath. Press again. Then she nods. The markings she draws are not decorative. They're precise. She dips the thorn into your pigment and begins. Tiny taps, a rhythm again. The man's face doesn't change much until it does. His brow relaxes, his lips part slightly, and you feel the moment something releases. Is it healing? Is it belief? Historians still argue whether ancient Nubian tattooing was truly medical or more symbolic. Some say it was proto-acupuncture. Others insist it was magic in disguise. The healer doesn't seem to care what they think. Her patients feel better. That's enough. She looks up and gestures toward your arm. Not yet, but soon. You're still sitting on that smooth stone slab, holding a now empty clay cup, when she finally speaks. Your hands are too soft, she says, with a tone that lands somewhere between an insult and a compliment. But maybe they'll learn. You aren't sure whether to bow or apologize, so you do both awkwardly. She chuckles and hands you a damp cloth to wipe the residue from your fingers. The ash has left faint gray rings across your skin. They look almost like beginnings. The man she tattooed has risen and gone his gait easier than before. You're told he'll return in a few days, mostly to show off, but also for a herbal compress. Pine resin and dried bark will be warmed and applied where she inked. Healing isn't a one-step thing here. It's layers, like linen or onions, or your emotional baggage. She gestures for you to follow her, and together you walk across the compound to her shelter, a round hut half buried in soft sand. The walls are daubed with faded paint spirals, dots, lines, some decorative, some not. You're not quite sure where the art ends and the medicine begins. Inside, it smells of earth and frankincense. The air is thick and still. A wooden stand holds her tattooing tools, each laid out with careful symmetry. There's a goatskin pouch filled with thorns. Another holds powdered pigments. You spot a small clay figurine of a woman with dots painted across her face and chest. A teaching tool. A model, or something older, an ancestor perhaps. She motions to a seated bundle in the corner. Another woman younger sits cross-legged, shoulders bare, spine straight. Her eyes are closed, but not in sleep. She's meditating, preparing. Her shoulder blades bear marks, short lines in groups of 3. Recent, still dark. She's healing. You're told the pattern was applied 3 days ago. Fever in her lungs. The lines trace the pain's migration, first chest, then ribs, then breathlessness. The healer worked each area in order tiny pierces that followed the sickness like a hunter tracks footprints. You ask tentatively whether she's a student. No, the healer says. She's the map. You nod. You don't fully understand, but you nod. You're getting better at that. There's a small pile of folded linen nearby, each cloth stained with ink in deliberate patterns. Practice memory. Or perhaps both. In this world, the line between healing and storytelling is gossamer thin. Every dot is a sentence, every curve a diagnosis. Outside, the sun has fully risen. Heat spreads like syrup over the compound, and the walls radiate warmth like baking stones. She leads you to a second area, shaded by palm leaves, where several small children sit, cross-legged, watching her intently. They are quiet not out of fear, but focus. One by one, they approach and show her their arms. She nods, taps their forearms, and sends them off. You realize she's checking earlier, work-faded tattoos applied weeks ago during a bout of river fever. The marks placed just below the elbow follow a dotted curve shaped like a river bend. Most children receive their first marks young. Not all are medicinal, some are protective. A dot at the nape of the neck for memory, 3 down the spine for strength, 1 on the sole of the foot for safe journeys. They're not always visible, but they're there. You're beginning to see that this is not an act of decoration, nor is it superstition, not entirely. It's somewhere in between. It's diagnosis, prescription, prevention, in skin. For a culture where memory lives not in books, but bodies. Historians still argue whether Nubian medical tattooing was systematic or intuitive. Some claim there was a precise code, an anatomical chart inked over centuries. Others believe it was individualized, each pattern developed in conversation between healer and patient. Either way, you can't deny the effects. People here talk about their marks the way you might discuss old surgeries. There's pride, nostalgia, even rivalry. Someone brags that their cousin has 15 tattoos. Someone else whispers about an elder whose skin holds stories no one dares translate. In the corner of the courtyard, a woman dozes beneath a tree. Her arms are covered in looping spirals. You ask about her. Arthritis, says the healer. Her hands used to lock shut in winter. We loosen them. You stare again. The loops look like vines, or waves. They travel up her arms and disappear beneath her tunic sleeves. You find yourself wondering how many lives have been changed with nothing more than soot thorn and nerve. The healer stands beside you and taps your shoulder. Later, she says, we'll mark you too. You manage not to flinch. You are beginning to notice something curious. The air here holds stories. Not the grand kind with battles and dynasties, but the quieter kind, the ones written in body heat and laughter, and the scent of someone's garden poultice. Every time the healer passes through the compound, people straighten not out of fear or respect exactly, but something deeper. As if she carries the weather of their bones, as if her presence is a barometer of how today will feel in their joints. You're following her again, past a row of flat-roofed dwellings where chickens patrol with the authority of minor nobles. A woman waves from a doorway, lifting a bowl of warm honey water. The healer nods in return, but doesn't stop. You trail behind, shoes full of sand and head full of half questions. She leads you toward a clearing you hadn't noticed before. A single tree leans lazily in the middle, casting enough shade for exactly one woven mat, which is already occupied. The man sitting on it looks like he's been stitched together from spare parts. His beard is wiry, his back hunched, and his knee is clearly not having a good day. But his eyes are bright, sharp even. He gives you a once-over and says, "Ah, the apprentice." You look behind you assuming he's talking to someone else. He isn't. The healer grunts something that may or may not be a compliment and gestures for you to sit beside the man. He stretches his leg with a hiss and begins to describe his pain. Not in dramatic terms, not even in complaint, just the facts. The ache in the joint, the stiffness after walking, the strange heat that rises at night. The healer listens, then begins. She doesn't mark him immediately. First she touches the skin, pressing gently, noting reactions, murmuring in response to his shifting breath. It's not random. You can see the decisions being made in real time. Here yes, here wait, this point now. Then the ink. The pigment today is darker than before, more soot, less ochre. It smells slightly metallic. You hand her the prepared thorn, a particularly fine one from yesterday's collection, and she begins tapping. Each touch is tiny, gentle, methodical. You watch as she creates a pattern that's neither entirely symmetrical nor fully abstract. A curved line around the kneecap, a small crescent beside the shin, 4 dots in a diagonal path across the thigh. You think of constellations again, or maybe a musical score, something precise and invisible and powerful. The man exhales slowly. "That's better," he says, though she's not even halfway finished. Historians still argue whether this kind of immediate relief was placebo or precision. Some researchers suggest the placement of these tattoos aligns with known pressure points, an ancient form of acupuncture, they say. Others believe the power lies in ritual, not biology. The rhythm, the smell, the hands that heal. Whatever the explanation, it works. You ask timidly why this patient's marks are so visible when others are hidden. She raises an eyebrow. "Pain should be seen," she says. "If not, it spreads." You file that one away. As she continues, a small group gathers, mostly women and elders, sitting at a respectful distance. They murmur occasionally, not interfering, just observing. There's something communal in the air. Not festive, not solemn, just joined. When she finishes, she leans back, wipes the thorn, and dips her fingers in a small bowl of yellowish oil. Ginger, maybe, or fennel. She spreads it gently over the marks, sealing them with warmth and scent. The man grins. "Like I'm 20 again," he lies. "You limped when you were 20, she replies without looking up. He laughs, and so do the onlookers. You help him to his feet slowly, and he clasps your arm. "Keep watching," he says. Better than any scroll. Back under the tree, she begins cleaning her tools. You're handed a strip of linen, a bowl of clean water, and a silent expectation that you'll get it right. You do your best. The tools are deceptively simple. A few thorns, some carved bone, a tiny slab of polished stone for mixing. But in your hands they feel like relics, sacred even. You clean them slowly, carefully, aware that the pigment stains don't come out easily, and shouldn't. When you're finished, she inspects your work, then nods. "A few more days," she says. Then you mark someone. Your stomach drops. Your hands twitch. But you nod. You're getting good at that. By the next morning, your nerves have settled. Slightly, just enough for your hands to stop shaking every time you reach for the thorn kit. You wake to the sound of birds, not melodic, exactly more like they're arguing, and the scent of warm date bread. A child brings you a piece as you stretch in the doorway, eyes still sticky with sleep. "Today is Pigment Day," the child announces, before skipping off without context. You soon find out what that means. The healer has laid out her supplies in the shade of the herb-drying rack bowls of ash ochre-powdered bark ground, seeds a small jar of honey, and what might be beetle shell ground to a deep dusty red. There's also a lump of something dark and waxy that smells faintly of the earth after rain. You're not sure what it is, but she grunts approvingly when you don't flinch at the scent. You begin by grinding, slowly, rhythmic circles with the pestle. The air fills with a fine haze of charcoal and spice. You stir it with a carved twig, watching the dry powders melt into liquid patterns. The healer moves beside you, adjusting ratios with quick, confident pinches. "Too thick and it clogs," she says. "Too thin and it fades by sunset." You're beginning to see that this is part chemistry, part weather report. A little more moisture in the air, and the resin behaves differently. A little too much sun, and the pigment dries before it's placed. There is no universal formula, only instincts honed over a lifetime and tested on skin. Once the base mixture is ready, she adds something unexpected, a single drop of oil from a tiny bottle sealed with beeswax and wrapped in linen. It smells like burnt myrrh and crushed thyme. It turns the black pigment glossy and thick. What's that, you ask? Memory, she replies. You think she's joking? She is not. This, you learn, is the signature of her craft. Every healer has one. A special blend. Some add ash from sacred fires. Others use river clay gathered at solstice. This one, hers is memory oil, brewed from a secret recipe, passed only to apprentices. That is, you. Apparently. You say nothing and stir clockwise as instructed. Always clockwise. Once the pigments are prepared, they are transferred into tiny sealed pots. Gourd shells, mostly dried and hollowed. They're painted with marks to indicate purpose, black for joints, red for fever, green for fertility, gold for ritual. You learn the symbols quickly, though she tests you anyway. You pass, barely. As you finish organizing the pigments, another visitor arrives. A young woman, maybe 16, with sharp eyes and arms covered in what looks like early scarring. Not raised tattoos, but old burns. She sits silently, offering no complaint. The healer squats beside her and lifts the girl's wrist. She presses gently along the skin. The girl winces, and you notice it just at the edge of her ribs. She flinched. The healer nods once. She's asking for the bird, the healer murmurs. You're not sure what that means, but you fetch the tools without being asked. You choose the thorn with the fine curve like she showed you. You warm the pigment in your hands. You place the bowl near her right knee. And you watch. The bird is a stylized shape, a crescent, a small circle, and 2 dashes all placed along the rib cage. It's not avian in the modern sense, but the intention is there. Flight, breath, lightness. It's used for shallow breathing and grief. The healer inks it slowly, pausing after each dot to observe the girl's face. She doesn't cry, but her eyes shine. Historians still argue whether the visual patterns used in Nubian healing were symbolic, linguistic, or entirely intuitive. Some believe they were a proto-alphabet coded systems of health and memory. Others suggest they were non-verbal prayers. The healer doesn't explain. She just works. Once the mark is complete, she seals it with a dusting of powdered salt and lays a linen strip over the site. The girl bows deeply and walks away with slower steps than she arrived, but straighter posture. You're left holding the pigment bowl, heart full of questions you can't yet ask. Later, under the tamarind tree, the healer leans beside you. You saw her scars, she says. That was her first word to me. Now she has a new one. You nod, slowly this time. Language you're learning isn't just sound. The wind shifts in the night, and when you wake, the entire compound smells like damp soil, and something citrusy, lemongrass maybe. You're not sure whether it's the season changing, or just someone scrubbing out a water jar nearby. Either way, it feels different. And you can sense it in the healer too. She's already up, hunched over a scrap of woven reed mat that she's using as a notepad of sorts. It's covered in dots and symbols made from pressed pigment, no ink, just color rubbed in with a smooth pebble. You inch closer, trying to decipher it. Pain map, she says, without looking up. New patient. You peer over her shoulder. The figure is rudimentary, just a human form stylized with little suns and dots blooming across the back and knees. Places of pain, you assume. Then she glances at you and grins. Want to help find it? Your stomach flips, but you nod anyway. The patient is already here. A man with shoulders like door frames and a face like bread left too long in the oven. He looks strong, but walks like he's made of glass. Every step is cautious. He doesn't say much, just lowers himself onto the mat with a grunt and a whispered apology to the wind for making it work harder today. The healer kneels beside him. You kneel too. She doesn't touch him right away. First she watches. His breathing, his blinking, the way he holds his weight. Then she asks a few questions, soft and brief. Where does it start? What time of day is it worse? What does it feel like when you sleep? He points to his lower back. She nods and begins pressing gently around the area, small firm taps with her thumbs. The man flinches when she hits a point just above the right hip. She repeats the pressure notes, the reaction, and makes a tiny charcoal mark on the skin. Then she hands you the pigment pot, black ash thick with memory oil. You take a breath and hold the thorn like a pencil. Then remember, it's not a pencil. It's a needle, a voice, a tool older than any alphabet. Your hand hovers. The healer tilts her head and says, "Trust the map." You begin. One dot, then another. You work slowly, methodically, and with a tension in your jaw that makes your ears ache. But you do it. Tiny dots in a crescent along the hip, following the line of his discomfort. Not too deep. Just enough to leave a message for the body. The man exhales like a bellows, finally opening. It feels like breathing, he murmurs. Historians still argue whether this process was therapeutic or theatrical. Some believe the very act of being seen, of having pain acknowledged and responded to, was half the cure. Others argue it had physiological effect, stimulating nerve clusters, triggering endorphins, altering blood flow. You're beginning to suspect it's all of the above, plus a little bit of hope rubbed in with the charcoal. When you finish, the healer inspects your work nods once, and then adds a single red dot beside your cluster. "What's that for?" you ask. "Balance," she replies. Apparently, healing isn't always linear. Sometimes it needs punctuation. As the man is helped to his feet, he touches his lower back and smiles just a little. "That's better," he says. Then he looks at you. Your hands know what they're doing. You don't believe him. Not really, but you say thank you anyway. Later, back under the tree, the healer shows you how she copies today's design into her record cloth, a long strip of linen marked with hundreds of tiny figures, each representing a case. You spot the spirals from the woman with arthritis. The river bends from the fevered children. The new crescent is added with your initials next to it. You're a part of the cloth now. That night, as the moon rises like a bruise behind the trees, you sit beside the healer while she grinds fresh pigment under starlight. The body, she says, remembers the stories it's told. So, we tell it a better one. You're starting to believe her. The day begins not with a call, but with silence. One of those heavy, meaningful silences that wraps itself around the compound like a wool blanket. Even the goats seem subdued, standing under their lean-to, with the same wary expression usually reserved for eclipses or unexpected guests. You find the healer sitting in front of her hut, not moving, just staring into her mixing bowls like they might reveal the future. Her hands are resting on her knees, but her fingers twitch slightly with each passing minute. Something's different. A girl appears at the edge of the compound, maybe 10 years old, barefoot, dusty, and clutching a damp scrap of linen. She says nothing, but her cheeks are flushed and her breathing is fast. The healer stands. You follow, trying not to step too loudly. The girl leads you across a narrow trail, shaded by neem trees, down toward the river, and finally to a reed shelter near the bank. Inside, an older woman lies wrapped in wool. Her eyes are closed. Her skin is damp, shimmering with sweat. The air is thick with heat and panic. The girl whispers, "She hasn't eaten in 3 days." The healer moves to the woman's side. She lifts the blanket and places her palm gently on the older woman's chest. The movement is slow, careful, reverent. Then she opens a pouch from her belt and removes a sprig of dried mint, crumbling it beneath the woman's nose. A reaction, a twitch, weak but there. She begins to speak softly, not to the girl, not even to you, but to the woman, telling her the names of her grandchildren, the smell of the herb garden, the shape of the village when seen from the hill at sunrise. It's a chant, a memory list, a roll call of reasons to stay tethered. Only then does she reach for the thorns. The pigment today is a mix you haven't seen, a vivid green flecked with gold. She applies it to the thorn with a practiced twist, then begins tapping. She marks a series of lines along the woman's wrists, then her ankles. Light patterns, short bursts of 3 or 4 dots in a line crossing major joints, then one final dot at the center of her sternum. You hold your breath. This is a ritual tattoo, not quite medicinal, not quite spiritual. Something in between. A kind of anchor. You've heard rumors of them marks meant not to heal a specific ailment, but to bind someone gently to the land of the living. A reminder. Historians still argue whether these types of Nubian tattoos were intended to ward off death or invite memory. Some say they were energy maps intended to awaken chi or spirit. Others believe they were simply part of a broader storytelling tradition, like lullabies for the unconscious. The woman stirs. Her mouth moves, but no sound comes. The healer leans close and listens. Then she laughs, soft and delighted. She asked for sour milk, she tells the girl. The girl nods and runs. You remain by the doorway, uncertain what to do. The healer sits cross-legged beside the woman and begins grinding herbs into a clay bowl. The rhythm is meditative. There's no rush now. The worst part is past. Outside the river, breeze stirs the reeds. The sun breaks through the neem trees and casts a pattern of dots and lines across the hut's wall, like a second skin, echoing the ones on her flesh. You finally sit, careful not to disturb anything. The healer hands you a bundle of dried leaves and a strip of charcoal. Draw her marks, she says, then learn them. You press the charcoal lightly against the leaf's surface and trace the pattern: wrists, ankles, chest. 3 dots, 4, 3. The rhythm of a fading fever. The punctuation of hope. Later, as the woman sleeps, the healer whispers that some tattoos are not for treatment, but for anchoring. Sometimes the body floats, she says, like a raft in the dark. This, she gestures to the pattern, tells it where the shore is. You think about that for a long time. Back in the compound, as you hang the leaf sketch with the others, the sky turns hazy with dust, and the scent of crushed mint still clings to your hands. And you realize this isn't just about sickness, it's about orientation, memory. The delicate reminder that a body once loved can still be drawn back from the edge, 1 dot at a time. This morning begins with laughter, not loud, not raucous, but that low kind that happens when someone remembers a joke 3 days late. You hear it while fetching water from the clay jars near the herb racks, and when you return to the healer's hut, it's coming from a small group gathered around the fire pit. You recognize most of them older women, one of the weavers and the broad-shouldered man from the pain map. They're sipping something steamy and sharing stories about tattoos that were meant to heal, but turned out lopsided or placed an inch too high. Someone's dot was mistaken for a mole by a visiting cousin. Another's fertility spiral apparently points in the wrong direction. There's a lot of eye rolling. One woman swears her elbow tattoo summons frogs. The healer doesn't laugh exactly, but she smiles in that patient way of someone who's seen more ink than rainfall. She looks over at you and gestures for you to sit. Story morning, she says. Every scar has one. She opens a cloth bundle in her lap, revealing a series of etched bone tablets. You lean in. Each one is carved with a pattern: dots, crescent, swirls. Beside them, a name and a year, written in a scratchy local script. It's a catalog of sorts. A history not in words, but in skin. She passes them around. The group holds each tablet carefully, sometimes kissing the edges, sometimes laughing softly, as they remember the person or event behind it. One woman wipes a tear. My sister. She says, pointing to a pattern that winds across a shoulder. Those dots were the only thing that let her walk again after the river took her breath. You study the marks. Some are dense, packed tightly like a code. Others sprawl elegant and strange, like constellations you've never seen. One is just a single dot placed at the exact center of the piece. What does 1 dot mean, you ask? The healer tilts her head. That she survived. And suddenly it feels like the simplest tattoo of all. Historians still argue about the function of these record tablets, whether they were teaching tools, ceremonial archives, or just deeply personal keepsakes. Some believe they were passed from master to apprentice as proof of lineage. Others think they were left behind like heirloom skin stories for the next generation. But here in the smoke and sun and storytelling, they feel alive. You notice that several of the group wear similar marks on their temples, small triangle-shaped clusters mirrored on each side. You point it out, and the weaver grins. Headaches, she says. Big ones. From husbands and teenagers. The healer snorts for once, openly amused. That one works, she mutters. You're invited to try carving your own. You choose a soft piece of bone no bigger than your thumb and attempt to recreate the pattern from the woman, by the river, 3 dots near the chest, curved slightly like a smile. Your lines aren't perfect. 1 dot wobbles, but the healer nods. It's not about perfect, she says. It's about memory. As the sun rises higher, the group begins to disperse. Some return to weaving, others to gardening or resting under trees. The tablets are wrapped again in linen and tucked away into the healer's pouch. But the stories linger, humming in the warm air. Later, as you help grind pigment, the healer tells you one more story. There was a woman, she begins, who had a mark for every child she delivered safely. Not her own, others. Dozens. A line of them down her spine like a ladder. She said each one was a soul she guided into the world. You ask what happened to her. She disappeared one summer, just gone. Some say she walked into the river. Others say she became the river. Either way, her marks stayed. You look down at the mixing bowl. The pigment is dark today, almost blue-black like ink spilled from a star. You stir it slowly clockwise until the swirl calms. And as the fire crackles beside you and the morning stretches into afternoon, you realize these stories aren't just remembered, they're worn. You're walking back from the river with a bundle of mint and a small jar of smoked salt when you hear the telltale creak of a trader's wagon. It's an unusual sound here, wooden wheels over packed dirt goats, shuffling nervously to make way, and a high voice arguing with itself about the price of onions. The healer steps out from her hut just as the trader arrives, a Cushite merchant in a dusty linen wrap, his skin burnished bronze from the desert sun, his wrists jangling with metal bangles. He's young, sharp-eyed, and already halfway through a very elaborate story about losing his best sandal to a camel that mistook it for a date. You like him immediately. His cart is filled with goods, fragrant bundles of dried fruit, carved wooden figurines, tiny jars of perfume sealed with wax, and oddly a small tortoise in a woven basket, which he insists is good luck. He sets up under the neem tree, unrolling a mat and spreading his wares like they're sacred relics. But it's not the tortoise or the rosewater that gets everyone's attention. It's the mark on his neck. 3 vertical lines crisply etched, shaded slightly darker than most you've seen. They're recent, maybe a month old. He catches you staring and grins. Tattooed by my mother, he says, touching the ink with 2 fingers. For strength, for long roads. The healer snorts softly. She marked you so you wouldn't get lost again. Same thing, he says, unbothered. As people begin to browse his cart, he sits beside the healer and begins trading stories of southern towns, where children are marked with crocodile tails for swimming, or northern villages, where healers tattoo tiny stars under the eyes of warriors to calm their gaze. He describes a woman he met once with inked palms, symbols for bartering, etched directly into her lifelines. Did they work, you ask? She was rich, he says, though that might have been the gold teeth. Historians still argue about how tattooing practices spread across ancient Africa. Was there a unified system, a shared origin, or did it emerge independently in different regions, shaped by climate, culture, and materials? The scholar's answer varies, but the merchant's is simple. Every road makes a new mark. You sit with him for a while, listening to tales of heat stroke and sandstorms, of river crossings and ankle sprains soothed by ink. He pulls up his tunic to show you a crescent-shaped tattoo near his hip. For stomach cramps, he says. I thought it was silly, but now I won't travel without it. The healer raises an eyebrow. Placebo, she mutters. He shrugs. Placebo got me through 5 border crossings and a batch of spoiled figs. He pulls something from his bag and offers it to you, a small bundle of dried flowers wrapped in silk. For the apprentice, he says. You'll need something to trade one day. You thank him and tuck it into your belt, unsure whether it's a gift, a test, or both. Later, as the trader prepares to leave, he lifts the tortoise from its basket and sets it down. It waddles off slowly toward the herb garden, utterly unbothered by its new life. The trader waves. Tell your tattoos to behave. You call back, tell your tortoise to aim for the mint. And just like that, he's gone cart rumbling back down the trail, sand rising in little plumes behind him. That evening, you sit under the neem tree with the healer, watching the tortoise nose curiously at a sprig of coriander. She glances at the bundle of dried flowers now hanging beside your pigment bowls. You'll mark someone from his village one day, she says. Maybe you already have. You look at your own hands faintly stained with soot and oil and wonder how many stories they'll carry before they stop shaking. The next day drips in with the sluggishness of cooked dates. Heat settles early humming, at the edges of every thought, curling the leaves and wilting even the most confident herbs in the garden. You find yourself moving slower, quieter, like the air demands it. The healer is already waiting for you near the shade wall, a wide-brimmed reed hat balanced absurdly on her head like a ceremonial salad bowl. You don't dare comment. She beckons you forward and points to a basket of thorns soaking in a shallow dish of river water. Sharpen, she says. You sit and begin selecting, inspecting, scraping each thorn carefully against a slate slab until it tapers into something elegant and deadly. It's a calming rhythm, like snapping peas or polishing spoons. As you work, the healer unrolls something beside you, a bundle of cured hide etched with delicate tattoo diagrams. It's old, cracked at the corners, and faintly perfumed with resin. These are borrowed, she murmurs, from the Eastern traders. Very old ways. You look closer. The diagrams are fascinating full spirals over the belly-tight lattice patterns on the soles of the feet, complex arcs around the collarbones. Some seem symbolic, others look suspiciously anatomical. A line traced just below the ribs might be for digestion. Another along the shoulder is labeled only with a glyph you don't recognize. Have you used these before, you ask? She shakes her head. Only the sun knows where they truly came from. She tells you about a legend, a priestess who wandered from temple to temple with ink made from gold dust and river clay, marking those who were said to hear the voices of the gods in their dreams. Her tattoos were invisible by day, only glowing under moonlight. It sounds impossible, but no more so than half the things you've seen this week. Some scholars claim these imported patterns were just fashion exotic marks to impress. Others believe they were medical, meant to interact with acupuncture points or energy pathways. A few think they were wholly reserved for oracles or dreamwalkers. No one agrees, but everyone wonders. A patient arrives before you can ask more. He's from a neighboring settlement, lean and sun-baked, with a quiet stiffness in his right arm. He bows to the healer, but glances nervously at the rolled hide. "Will it hurt?" he asks. "All things worth remembering," Dushi replies. He exhales sharply and kneels. This time, she invites you to draw the pattern. It's not an original, but one from the scroll, a sequence of lines that resembles a lopsided star, spread just above the shoulder blade. The movement of the arm, she says, should realign the lines each time he lifts something, like a reminder embedded in action. You trace the lines first with red clay, adjusting for bone and muscle. Then, with breath held and thorn gripped tightly, you begin the ink work. The pigment today is earthy brown, less harsh than black, more suited to blending into sun-aged skin. It smells like cedar and crushed citrus leaf. The points go in smooth, like the thorn wants to help. The man doesn't speak, but his jaw unclenches after the third line. You continue careful and measured. It's not fast work, but it's clean. When the last mark is placed, the healer gently pats your shoulder. "Good," she says, "balanced." She applies a thin salve made from aloe and smoked ghee, wrapping the tattoo loosely in a strip of linen stamped with a single dot. "What does the dot mean?" you whisper. "It means someone will ask," she replies. The man leaves, rotating his shoulder experimentally. There's something lighter in his gait, not pain gone perhaps, but pain explained. As the sun begins to dip behind the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the pigment pots, you roll up the borrowed diagrams and hand them back to the healer. "Will we ever use the spiral one?" you ask. She smiles but says nothing. Instead, she gestures for you to look at her forearm. There, mostly hidden by her sleeve, is the faint trace of a spiral. So faint you'd almost miss it. So perfect it couldn't be her first. You nod and say nothing. Some marks don't need to be discussed. They just need to be remembered. The light this morning is different. Thicker, almost syrupy, like honey has been poured across the sky. You squint up at it while brushing lint from your tunic and nearly trip over a sleeping chicken. Again. The healer is outside, crouched beside a small clay pot half buried in the earth. She's muttering to it, or maybe to herself, and gently pressing something soft into the soil. You inch closer, curious. "Mallow," she says without glancing up. "Good for swelling, bad for goats." You nod. Goats do ruin everything. The compound is quieter today. The younger children are off helping with water gathering, and most of the elders have retreated to the cooler shade of the upper ridge. It feels like a lull, but not an empty one, more like something is waiting. That something arrives just before midday. A woman approaches from the western path, riding a donkey laden with bundles wrapped in palm leaves. She wears a robe of faded saffron and carries a carved walking stick that seems more ceremonial than necessary. You know immediately this is no ordinary visitor. The healer greets her like an old friend, but with just enough formality to suggest respect. They speak in quiet tones, exchanging a few words and many looks. Then the woman gestures to her arm. She unwraps a bandage, revealing a set of pale, symmetrical marks. Older tattoos faded with time, etched in a straight line down her forearm. They're cracked, and just below them, the skin is angry and red. "They healed badly," the woman murmurs. "Ink done in haste. Ceremony, not care." The healer tuts softly. "Temple work." The woman nods once, priest marked, for fertility rites. It's the first time you've seen this kind of tattoo temple-sanctioned ritualistic, but apparently more decorative than practical. You study the lines, they're beautifully etched, but rigid, symmetrical, in a way that feels unnatural. She's come to have them softened. It's not erasure. The healer won't do that. But she will rework the marks, adjust the flow, ease the tension, redirect energy where the original design ignored it. You fetch the tools instinctively now, and she begins preparing the new pigment. This batch is rare, a soft blue-gray made from ground woad and oil of clove. It's cooler than the others, both in color and scent, and designed to soothe, not stimulate. You help by warming the oil over a low flame, stirring until it glistens like river stone. The healer mixes it with a light ash base and tests the color on a strip of linen. It's subtle, calm, meant for healing beneath the skin. As the woman settles into the shade, the healer begins the adjustments. She doesn't add much, just a few curves here, a softened edge there. She draws a single spiral at the wrist, barely visible, that seems to unlock the rest of the design. The woman doesn't flinch. Her eyes are closed. Her breathing slows with each dot. Historians still argue whether Nubian tattoo traditions had consistent symbolic meanings across regions. Some say spirals always meant protection. Others claim the meaning changed depending on who did the work and why. Scholars love patterns. Healers, they love people. When the final mark is placed, the healer wraps the arm with a compress soaked in aloe and pomegranate peel. The woman smiles. "It feels right now," she says. She stays for tea, and as the day cools into something drinkable, she shares a story. There was a time, she says, when tattoos were given during childbirth, not just to the mothers, but to the midwives. A spiral on the thumb to calm the hand, a line across the chest to strengthen the voice. So, the body knew its job, she says, and the spirit remembered its courage. You sip your tea, slowly letting that settle. Later, as the woman prepares to leave, she hands the healer a small carved token, an ivory circle etched with the same pattern she now wears. A thank you, a reminder, a mark of trust. As she rides off into the distance, you glance at the sky again. The honey light is fading into something softer, cooler. The air smells like mint soot and something else, possibility. And when the healer looks at you and says, "Someday you'll fix someone else's bad tattoo," you believe her. The wind is restless today. Not strong, but shifty, like it can't decide which direction to sigh in. It rustles through the reed mats, sways the hanging herb bundles, and makes the pigment cloths flutter like sleepy flags. You feel it in your shoulders too, a kind of buzzing anticipation with no clear reason. The healer is at the riverbank when you find her kneeling beside a flat stone, worn smooth by years of use. She's scrubbing something into the surface, a fine black powder mixed with water, forming delicate streaks. It looks like calligraphy, written in a forgotten alphabet. "What are you doing?" you ask. She doesn't look up. "Testing." You sit beside her and watch. The water she's using isn't plain river water. It's steeped with something, crushed bark maybe. It smells faintly bitter, with a sharp edge of citrus and iron. She dips a reed stylus into the mixture and begins tracing lines onto the stone, again her fingers moving with steady precision. After a while, she tilts the stone toward the light and the marks glimmer, just barely. "It's new," she says, "a recipe from the north." You peer closer. The pigment isn't black exactly. It's a deep violet gray, almost bruise-colored, with tiny flecks of something metallic. "What's it for, you ask?" She pauses. "For the ones who don't want to be noticed." You blink. The healer explains some people want their marks hidden, not because they're ashamed, but because their healing is private. Discreet tattoos placed along the ribs, behind the ears, on the soles of the feet. Spots rarely seen, but constantly used. This pigment, when applied just right, becomes nearly invisible in daylight. But it remains potent. The wind picks up again, and a few leaves scatter over the river's surface. You watch them spin and drift, and wonder what kind of patient would ask not to be seen. As if summoned by the thought, a woman arrives. She's older, maybe 60, but carries herself with the precision of someone who doesn't believe in wasted movement. Her hair is wrapped in layers of indigo cloth, and her eyes flicker like moth wings, quick, observant, slightly wary. She speaks softly. "I need something only I will know is there." The healer nods. Pain. The woman hesitates. Fear. "It finds me at night." The healer doesn't flinch at the answer. She gestures for the woman to sit and begins preparing the special ink. You're invited to assist gathering the ingredients, warming the oil, grinding the charcoal until it sighs into powder. The woman chooses the placement herself, a mark behind her left ear, just beneath the line where her hair grows. "I want to forget it's there," she says. "Until I remember, it's working." It's a single curved line, no longer than your smallest finger, shaped like a crescent moon, nested inside a wave. It takes only 5 taps to complete, but those 5 taps carry weight. The woman exhales a sound that feels bigger than her chest should hold. She smiles, a little embarrassed. "That's ridiculous," she says. "No," the healer replies. "That's relief." Historians still argue whether tattooing for emotional ailments was real medicine or symbolic comfort. Some claim it was placebo with panache. Others suggest ancient healers understood the link between body and mind long before we gave it a Latin name. Either way, it works. The woman leaves with a wrapped scarf and a straighter spine. That night, under a sky peppered with sharp stars, the healer shows you her old pigment logs, scraps of leather and linen with faint ink tests, symbols and notes in the local dialect. You spot one labeled invisibility. You run your thumb over it and feel the ghost of a crescent moon. The healer looks at you and says, "There's healing in silence too." You nod, but this time not just to agree. This time you understand. Some marks are meant to be remembered, some are meant to be seen, and some, just a few, are meant to be secret. You're halfway through sorting dried chamomile when a quiet voice interrupts the bird song. It's a girl, maybe 12, with solemn eyes and a linen wrap too big for her frame. She stands at the edge of the compound, clutching something wrapped in palm leaf and glancing nervously toward the healer's hut. You rise and wave her in gently. She enters on hesitant feet and unwraps her bundle with the care of someone revealing treasure. Inside is a small, tightly bound figurine carved from ivory or bone. It's difficult to tell with a series of tiny inked lines down its back. The pigment is faded, but the pattern is familiar. 3 columns tapering toward the base. You've seen it before, on a mummy in one of the healer's cloth sketches. The girl clears her throat. "It was my grandmother's," she says. "She wanted to be marked like this." You nod, not quite sure what to say. The healer joins you a moment later and accepts the figure with reverence. She doesn't ask questions. She just runs her fingers over the lines, gently brushing away the bits of dried palm leaf, as if waking the carving from a long nap. She knew what she needed, the healer murmurs. What follows is slow, almost ceremonial. The girl is not sick, not in pain, at least not the physical kind, but she wants a mark. Not because it will cure something, because it will remember someone. The healer agrees. There is precedent for this, marks inspired by the deceased, not for function, but for continuity. A way of saying, "I carry them still." Historians call these commemorative tattoos, and they're found across ancient Nubian burial sites, often faint, hidden on the inner arm or beneath the ribs. Always personal. You're asked to prepare the pigment. It's a deep gray this time, mixed with a tiny amount of powdered date stone. For memory, the healer says without elaboration. The mark itself is placed on the girl's upper spine, just beneath the neckline, where clothing will cover it, but where she'll always feel it against her skin. You ink it slowly, copying the figurine's pattern precisely. Each column, each dot, each taper. The girl doesn't flinch. She's focused still, as if listening for something. When you finish, the healer places a cool compress over the mark and hums a soft melody you've never heard before. The girl's shoulders drop. A breath escapes her lips like a song released. She sits quietly for a few minutes, then wraps the figurine again and tucks it back into the folds of her wrap. She thanks you both, not with words, but with a long, steady look, and walks away the same way she came. Later, you ask the healer how often this happens, marking the living in the image of the dead. More than you'd think, she replies. Grief likes to be touched. That evening, you find yourself sketching the mark in your linen journal, just to remember the feeling of placing it. It's the first one that didn't feel like medicine, and yet it healed something. As the moon rises, you sit with your knees pulled to your chest, beside the storage hut, watching moths dance near the firelight. You think about how memory clings not just to objects and places, but to skin, to pigment, to pressure and precision and presence. And you wonder how many stories walk beside you now, silent and inked just beneath the surface. The morning sun has barely crested the horizon when the shouting begins. Not angry shouting, just urgent, high-pitched, half-panicked shouts of the sort that usually mean either someone has given birth or someone has stepped on a snake. Maybe both. You drop your linen wrap mid-fold and follow the sound to the center of the compound, where a young man is limping in a wide, unnecessary circle. He's clutching his lower back and explaining somewhat dramatically that he woke up broken. The healer, unimpressed, is already examining his posture. He insists the pain began, yesterday worsened overnight, and now radiates from the base of his spine like hot wind during a sermon. You bite your lip to avoid laughing. The healer doesn't even blink. She gestures for him to lie flat. This, it seems, is a diagnostic case. Not a ritual, not a request, but a puzzle. The healer presses gently at key points, spine, hips, knees. The man twitches when she touches a spot just above the sacrum. She marks it lightly with charcoal. Then she does something you haven't seen before. She brings out a strip of linen covered in faded ink, an old body map. Not artistic, not ceremonial, but practical. It shows pressure points and common pain locations, each with a suggested marking pattern beside it. This isn't lore. This is procedure. You watch her compare the man's posture to the sketch, nodding as she confirms the location. She begins to draw the new pattern directly on his skin, a diagonal line of dots curving from his spine toward his right hip. One additional dot sits slightly above, like a tiny satellite. This is the root, she mutters, where the fire starts. You're handed the thorn. You hesitate, but she gives a slight nod. Encouragement or challenge, you're not sure. Either way, your hand moves. The pigment today is a deep rust color tinged with clove and lemongrass. Sharp, spicy. You ink the first dot, careful not to press too deep. The man winces more at the anticipation than the pain. By the third dot, his shoulders relax. Historians still argue whether such tattoos truly offered relief from chronic pain or simply triggered a shift in how the body interpreted discomfort. Some suggest it functioned like ancient acupressure, stimulating nerves and redirecting pain signals. Others believe it worked purely because it felt like something was being done. But as the last mark is made, the man sighs so deeply it rattles the thatch above him. Better, he whispers. You wrap the area in cool cloth, soaked in chamomile tea, then help him sit up slowly. His expression shifts from dramatic to something softer, humble even. I feel like I was mapped, he says. You were, the healer replies, already cleaning the thorn. After he leaves, you sit beside the body map, tracing the faded lines with your fingertip. The parchment is covered in notes, some in the healer's hand, others in writing you don't recognize. One section near the shoulder area has been scratched out entirely. What was here, you ask? She glances over. Mistake. From a long time ago. You wait, but she doesn't elaborate. You ask if you can make your own copy. She nods. You get to work drawing carefully onto a clean strip of linen. As you copy the patterns, you begin to see how the human body tells its story, not just in pain, but in pattern, in movement, in memory. Later that afternoon, a goat sneezes dramatically beside you and knocks over your ink pot. You curse under your breath and begin mopping up pigment with a scrap of cotton. The healer chuckles from across the courtyard. You can map pain, she says, but not goats. As the sun begins to dip and the evening cools, you sit beneath the neem tree and press your fingers gently against your own lower back, just to see where your fire might begin. You wake to the smell of something unexpected, sweet, smoky, with a hint of citrus. It draws you out of your bedroll, like a silk thread tugging gently at your collar. You follow the scent toward the riverbank, half expecting to find the healer roasting fruit or preparing an early tincture. Instead, you find strangers. A group of 5 travelers has arrived just after dawn. Their robes are long, hemmed in unfamiliar patterns, and their sandals are dusted red from desert paths. They carry themselves with the quiet grace of people used to watching more than speaking. They're greeted by the healer with a nod and the faintest smile. She doesn't ask why they've come. She already knows. They carry ink on their arms and shoulders, faint, fine-lined, and unlike any pattern you've seen so far. One of them, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a wrist wrapped in embroidered thread, offers the healer a small scroll. Inside are delicate illustrations, tattoo patterns from far-off regions, spirals that bend the wrong way, stars made of triangles, symbols you can't place but somehow feel. The healer unrolls it slowly and nods. Greek work, she murmurs, or something close. You glance at the scroll and realize it's a map, not of land but of practice. Designs passed down and carried across water and sand. Some are marked for heat, others for sleep, and a few bear no label at all. Historians still argue about the transmission of tattoo knowledge between cultures in the ancient world. Did it spread through trade, intermarriage, migration, or was it simply rediscovered again and again by people who felt pain and needed to name it with ink? Whatever the answer, today you see proof. The travelers are not sick, but they have come to learn, to share. They speak slowly through a mix of words and gestures, describing their own rituals. One man pantomimes applying a tattoo along the belly for digestion. Another shows a mark on the ankle, said to bring calm in boats. The healer listens, then invites them to watch as she works. Today's patient is an elder from a neighboring settlement. He suffers from a common ache tension behind the shoulders, where the ribs meet the back and the years collect like dust. The healer has treated it before. She has a favorite pattern for this one, but today she adjusts it, slightly influenced by one of the visitor's diagrams. You see the collaboration unfold in real time. The base of the design remains hers. Nubian precise, but a new crescent is added, near the spine, lifted from the scroll. A hybrid. A conversation in pigment. You're asked to assist. You prepare the mixture, adding just a pinch of the visitor's recommended powder, dried citrus peel, and a hint of smoked cinnamon. The scent is different. Familiar, yet foreign. As the ink dries, it darkens into a rich amber black. You apply the final dot just above the curve of the shoulder blade. The elder groans with relief, like someone lifted a mat from my bones. The travelers nod, visibly pleased. Afterward, the healer and her guests sit in the courtyard, sipping mint tea and sketching diagrams into the dirt with twigs. You join them, adding your own versions of the patterns you've learned. The sun creeps across the sky, casting long shadows and warming the lines of your shared language. You ask one of the travelers through halting gestures and borrowed words what tattooing means where they come from. He draws a circle, then a smaller one inside it. Center, he says, of pain, of person. You nod. Understanding doesn't need fluency. That evening, under a sky brushed with orange and rose, you copy a new design into your cloth journal. It's part Nubian, part foreign. A hybrid like today. A pattern for tension and travel. You label it simply, Across Waters. And as you close the cloth, you realize the map of healing is not fixed. It grows, breathes, shifts. Like ink and skin, like stories, like you. You're sitting in the herb hut, sorting dried fennel pods into neat, slightly wonky piles, when you hear someone shuffle past the doorway with a very distinct limp. Not a painful limp, more of a theatrical one, the kind used to elicit sympathy, or at least a good cup of goat milk. You peek outside. It's the weaver's cousin, an older man with a thick beard, one functioning sandal, and what he claims is the most complicated case of joint memory south of the cataracts. The healer raises one eyebrow. He raises both hands. I swear it's real. My shoulder aches before rain. My elbow buzzes when my sister-in-law visits. And my foot, oh my foot, it's a prophet of cold weather. You can't help but smile. He might be exaggerating, but the limp is genuine, and the way he cradles his left hand suggests real discomfort. The healer waves him over and gestures for him to sit on the flat mat near her tools. He does so with a grunt and begins unlacing his sandal like he's negotiating a treaty. He points to his foot, then his hip, then circles his finger vaguely in the air. It travels, he says, like a moody bird. The healer nods, migrating pain. She begins her assessment. Press here, tap there. Ask a few pointed questions that sound more like poetry than medicine. Then she looks over at you. Get the scar cloth, she says. You fetch it from its place inside the hut, a long strip of woven fabric inked with raised tattoos. Not smooth pigment work, but patterns intentionally scarred and puffed. The lines are thicker, meant to be read by touch as much as sight. They were used, she explains, in patients who couldn't describe their pain, marks as memory, braille for the body. The traveler watches curiously. You're going to scar me. The healer shakes her head. Not today, but I'll use the idea. She selects a modified pattern, 6 dots clustered like a constellation, with a thick line through the center. For shifting pain, she murmurs. And stories too stubborn to sit still. She shows you where to place it just above the ankle bone, curving slightly around the heel. The pigment is mixed with a pinch of resin and rosewood ash. It'll sting, she warns. That's the point. You take the thorn. You mark slowly, letting the sound of the wind guide your hand. The dots come first, neat, deliberate. Then the line. It's not just decoration, it's an interruption. A message. Stop here. Pain no further. The traveler exhales. It feels like someone's listening. Historians still argue about the scar tattoos of ancient Nubia, whether they were meant as identification healing or both. Some say they were a language unto themselves, developed in silence and passed down by touch. Others argue they were simply the only permanent method for people without written records to track long-term ailments. But when you look at the man's face now, his eyes closed, his hand relaxed, it doesn't matter. He thanks you in a way that feels less like gratitude and more like shared understanding. He pulls from his pack a small charm carved from bone, a fish with a broken tail, and hands it to the healer. For balance, he says, the river taught me that. Later, as the sun sinks low and the earth cools beneath your feet, the healer lets you study the scar cloth in full. Some marks are so thick they rise like ridges. Others are delicate, just barely visible. She guides your finger over one. What was this one for, you ask? She closes her eyes. Loneliness. You trace the shape again, slower this time. Then, almost as an afterthought, you ask, did it work? She smiles. He came back. Every year, just to talk. And in the fading light, as birds settle and smoke curls from distant cook fires, you realize something beautiful and a little heartbreaking. Sometimes medicine is just a mark that says, I saw where it hurt. It starts with a yowl. Not a person this time, but a cat loud offended and deeply invested in making sure everyone hears about it. You jerk awake from your mat, unsure whether you're dreaming or being cursed. The second yowl confirms it. There is a feline emergency underway. You stumble outside, rubbing your eyes just in time to witness chaos in miniature. The healer's prize poultice prepared lovingly from warmed fig resin, fermented turmeric, and some sort of mint you were explicitly told not to sniff too closely has been knocked over. And the culprit is sauntering away, tail held high, muzzle crusted with pale gold goo. You and the healer stand side by side, watching as the cat licks its paw with regal indifference. I needed that, the healer says flatly. You nod solemnly. She doesn't care. The healer sighs. She never does. This is Kasha, the semi-domesticated temple cat, who has decided entirely on her own that your compound belongs to her. She comes and goes, steals what she pleases, and once left a frog in the healer's tea bowl. No one touches her. No one dares. Today, however, she's clearly interfered with an important task. The poultice was for a middle-aged woman arriving at dusk suffering from what's delicately referred to as too much wind in the bones, a combination of swelling fatigue and a persistent cold in the joints that no blanket seems to touch. The tattoo was to be paired with that specific paste sealed over the markings for a moon cycle. Now, thanks to Kasha's sticky intervention, the healer is forced to improvise. You're sent to the herb racks to gather substitutes dried, rue-aged honeycomb, and a pinch of something labeled simply for grumpiness. The healer's handwriting on that jar looks especially aggressive. As you work, she begins the tattoo, a ring of short lines around the woman's knee, each line placed between joint points like rays from a hidden sun. The woman winces, but only at first. She closes her eyes as the pattern takes shape, and by the third line, her breathing is slow and even. Historians still debate the interplay between Nubian tattooing and other forms of healing, like salves, compresses, and herbal rubs. Some scholars see tattooing as an extension of topical medicine, a physical opening for absorption. Others argue that the ink herbs and ceremony combine to create a layered treatment, physical, emotional, and symbolic. You suspect they're all half right. As you return with the replacement paste, the healer gives you a long look. We'll see, she says, dabbing it on. Not perfect, but nothing ever is. Kasha, watching from the roof, Beam yawns dramatically and begins to clean her tail. You end the session with a linen wrap carefully fastened and marked with the healer's dot of approval. The woman offers a shy thanks plus a small pouch of sweet dates that you definitely plan to sneak later. After she's gone, the healer leans back on her stool and fans herself with a folded palm leaf. She's been visiting for years, she murmurs, and only now asks for ink. You glance over. Why now? Because pain is polite, she says, until it forgets how to be. You write that down, quietly. That evening, you find Kasha curled up inside one of the pigment baskets looking smug and slightly stained. The golden residue on her fur smells exactly like citrus and regret. You're about to shoo her out when the healer stops you. She's earned her place, she says. Any cat who eats medicine is clearly sick. You raise an eyebrow, or enlightened. The healer shrugs. Both, probably. You leave the cat where she is and hang the empty poultice jar beside the herb rack as a cautionary tale. Later, as the stars emerge and a chorus of frogs begins their nightly concert, you sit by the doorway sketching the pattern from earlier, the joint ring, the improvised salve, the look of calm in the woman's face when the final line was placed. And beside it, almost as a joke, you draw a paw print. Some stories deserve a footnote. The next morning breaks slow and gold with a soft haze over the fields, and a smell in the air that suggests someone somewhere has already burned the porridge. You step outside, rubbing your eyes, expecting a quiet start. But the compound is buzzing, not loudly, just a low thrum of murmured conversations, wandering glances, and the faint sound of a reed flute playing something vaguely philosophical. You catch bits of phrases. She asked for a tattoo and a vision. He thinks it's a prophecy. They brought the stars. You follow the whispers to the healer's hut, where a young woman barely out of girlhood sits wrapped in a robe of pale saffron, her cheeks flushed with excitement or nerves. Maybe both. She holds a basket woven with images of the moon in its phases, and in her lap is a single piece of parchment marked with a design so intricate you have to squint. It's a tattoo request, of a very specific nature. She wants to be told her future, the healer says, holding back a sigh. You blink. By tattoo. Through tattoo, the woman says, bright-eyed. Not just for health. I want it to guide me. You glance at the pattern. It spirals out from a central dot, forming something like a solar map, with points marked for strength, truth, and one you can only guess is romantic drama. The healer exchanges a look with you. She wants a chart of her fate, on her back. You stifle a smile. The healer does not. Now, to be fair, it's not unheard of. There are traditions in neighboring regions, Berber, Hellenic, even early Mesopotamian, where tattooing intersects with divination. Marks used not only to heal or protect, but to interpret, to claim, to predict. A living talisman, a symbolic compass. Historians still argue whether these tattoos were believed to actually hold power, or if they simply gave shape to a hope too large for words. Some argue they were psychological anchors. Others see them as spiritual placeholders, a way to feel chosen. The healer doesn't deny the idea outright. She just says, let's at least make sure it won't give her a rash. You're put in charge of ink preparation, something less reactive, suited for the delicate skin between the shoulder blades. You mix it slowly, fine charcoal, violet flower ash, and a bit of honey water for consistency. The result is a soft black, almost smoky like twilight in pigment form. She lies face down on the mat, arms folded beneath her head, eyes shut in a dreamy expression. You're told where to begin the base of the spine, working upward. Each point on the design is placed where energy is said to collect solar plexus shoulder tension zones, the crown of the neck. The pattern itself is oddly soothing, balanced, almost musical in its repetition. You ink with care, letting your hand follow the spirals like a needle tracing vinyl. The girl murmurs something as you work. What did she say, you whisper? The healer listens, then smiles. She said it feels like remembering something she hasn't done yet. When the last curve is placed and sealed with a dab of rose salve, the girl sits up, stretching like a cat. Her face is calm now, all that frantic hope smoothed into something quieter. She thanks you both and leaves without fanfare, the future wrapped neatly in linen beneath her robe. Later, over a bowl of crushed lentils, you ask the healer if she believes in tattoo divination. She pauses, chews slowly, then says, belief is medicine. Not always the one you wanted, but sometimes the only one that works. You write that down too. That evening, you add her design to your journal, the star path spiral, labeled for guidance, or at least good posture. And beside it, you draw a small arrow pointing forward, not for direction really, but just to say onward, because sometimes the most healing thing you can do is imagine something waiting ahead. You're rinsing pigment bowls by the river when the drums begin. Not war drums, thankfully. Nothing sharp or urgent. These are low, steady, ceremonial, the kind of rhythm that settles into your ribs and politely takes up residence. You dry your hands on your tunic and follow the sound back to the compound, already sensing that today won't be normal. The healer stands near the central fire pit, flanked by 3 visiting elders dressed in layered linen, dyed in deep saffron and soot black. Their faces are marked old weathered tattoos that crawl like ivy from jaw to temple. Each one bears a different pattern, but they move with the same solemn grace. A naming ceremony. You've only seen one before from a distance, but today you'll assist. The child at the center of it all is about a year old, round-faced and curious, chewing on a fistful of reed fiber and drooling like it's a profession. He's being passed from aunt to aunt, then finally placed gently onto a woven mat in the shade. His mother sits nearby, tense with pride. The tattoo for a naming isn't chosen lightly. It doesn't state the name, it shapes it, guides it. A kind of intention carved into skin before the child can speak, often placed behind the ear or on the shoulder, sometimes over the heart. Today's mark is simple 3 dots forming an upward arrow. It means growth, or rising, or sometimes just, may he reach. The healer once told you the interpretation shifts with the seasons, the wind, and the reader's mood. Maybe that's the point. Historians still debate the purpose of infant tattoos in Nubian culture. Some call them protective charms. Others insist they were tribal identifiers. But there's evidence to suggest these were often hopeful acts, quiet prayers sealed in soot. You prepare the smallest thorn in your kit, sharpened to the width of a hair. The pigment is soft today, steeped in honey and bark ash, less aggressive than your usual mixtures. It smells like spring after rain. The child doesn't cry when the first dot goes in. He blinks. He chews harder on his reed. You place the second, then the third. The arrow appears tiny, dark, perfect. The mother exhales. The healer seals the mark with a dab of goat fat and crushed rose petals. It's more ritual than remedy, but you can feel the hush ripple outward through the crowd. Someone hums. A child nearby starts clapping off rhythm. A dog yawns theatrically. Life resumes. But the mark remains. Later, while washing the thorn in the stream, you think about all the names you've been given in your life. Some heavy, some short-lived, some that still cling in places you can't reach. And you think about this one 3 dots rising. That evening, the healer lets you hold the naming cloth, a long linen panel where each child's mark is recorded, stitched beside the day, the season, and the condition of the sky. You find today's entry and trace it softly. The sky was pale gold with no clouds. The entry reads, "Rising child, firstborn of Tamar, marked in spring." You add one note of your own in the margin, not tradition, just instinct. Eyes wide, did not cry. And you wonder how many other futures began with a dot no larger than a raindrop. Today begins with smoke. Not the heavy, acrid kind of fire gone wrong, but something more intentional, thin white threads curling into the morning air, rising from small clay pots placed at each corner of the compound. The scent is unfamiliar, sharp and spicy, like citrus rinds thrown onto burning cedar. You ask the healer what it is. "Warding," she says simply. "We're expecting visitors. The kind of visitors who bring questions notebooks and too much politeness." They arrive by mid-morning, 4 of them dressed in travel robes too clean for real roads and sandals that have clearly never kicked goat dung. Outsiders, scholars likely. One carries a scroll case. Another wears a pendant in the shape of a quill. All of them glance around like they're looking for something ancient to name. They greet the healer with wide eyes and wary deference. She nods, neither warm nor cold, and gestures for them to sit on the outer mats. You're stationed nearby with a tray of cool water and a watchful eye. They explain tentatively, and in far too many words, that they've heard of her practice and would like to observe the tradition. Not interrupt, just observe. Maybe ask a few questions. Perhaps sketch. The healer listens in silence. Then she gestures to the stone basin where her tools sit soaking. "You may watch," she says, "but do not blink too often or you'll miss it." The scholars exchange glances, uncertain whether that's a threat or a proverb. It might be both. Soon a patient arrives, a young man from upriver, limping slightly, a band of pain circling his hip like a badly tied sash. The healer examines him, briefly nods, and begins her preparation. You gather the materials, aware of the scholars watching your every movement. One jots something down just from the way you hold the thorn. Another sketches the ink bowl like it's an artifact. The tattoo today is functional, a cluster of dots spiraling gently outward from the hip bone, each one placed according to the patient's movement. You've helped with this before. The key is not symmetry, but flow, following the path of strain and relieving it with rhythm. You place the dots, slowly feeling the heat of curiosity from behind you. One of the scholars leans in slightly. "Excuse me," he whispers, "is this meant to realign fascia?" The healer raises an eyebrow. It's meant to help him sit without wincing. The man nods, scribbling furiously. Another scholar holds up her scroll, displaying a copy design from a museum in Meroa. "Have you seen this pattern before?" The healer looks once. "Yes." "Can you explain its use?" "No." Silence. Historians still argue over how much can be learned from tattoo fragments alone. Without the stories, the context, the people, they are just lines. Beautiful, yes, but mute. The scholars seem frustrated by this, but not angry, just baffled. They stay through the procedure, watching with a reverence that occasionally slides into awe. You can see their world shifting slightly, like sand settling into new shapes. When the session ends, the patient thanks you both and leaves with a gentle smile. The scholars rise too, bowing clumsily, offering gifts: dried herbs, a jar of ink from the north, a scroll of translated proverbs. The healer accepts them with a nod, but doesn't unroll the scroll. As they leave, one turns back and says, almost shyly, "You've given me more questions than answers." The healer shrugs. "Good." That evening, under a sky streaked in coral and ash, you sit beside her, unrolling the scroll at last. It's full of careful translations, academic notes, and speculations about ancient symbols. One catches your eye. A line beside a triangle mark reads, "Possibly for grief," or "strength," or both. You show it to her. She laughs once, dry and soft. "That one's for laughter, the kind you have after crying." You nod. And then just for yourself, you draw a small version of that triangle in your journal. You label it for complexity. The next morning, the compound is unusually still. No visitors, no limping villagers, not even a dramatic goat performance. It's as if everyone agreed silently to take a breath. You sit cross-legged outside the pigment hut, sun warming your back, slowly stringing dried ginger slices onto a cord. The healer is nowhere to be seen, but that's not unusual. She moves like weather, appearing when needed and disappearing when you're about to ask for help, carrying something heavy. Eventually, you find her by the river, seated on a flat rock, bare feet in the water. She's not meditating or mixing or working. She's just sitting, staring at the ripples like they're telling her secrets. When she sees you, she pats the rock beside her. You sit. She says nothing for a while. Then, what do you think you've learned? You blink, about tattooing. She doesn't answer, just waits. You begin to speak, halting at first, then faster. You talk about pigment ratios, patterns, the difference between marking for pain and marking for memory. You describe the patients, the stories, the moments that changed you without asking permission. You even mention the goat. She listens, hands still, gaze steady. Finally, she nods and pulls up the hem of her robe. There on her thigh, just above the knee, is a tattoo you've never seen. A spiral of symbols, dots, lines, crescents, all arranged in a complex web. You lean in. What does it mean, you ask? She runs her finger gently over the pattern. It's my mistakes. You look up surprised. Every one I made that left a scar, she continues. Not on skin, on people. Each mark reminds me who I wasn't ready to help, who came too early, who I misunderstood, who I didn't listen to hard enough. It's beautiful and strange and humbling. I mark them, she says softly, so I never forget to be better. Historians would never find this one. No museum will preserve it. No scroll will translate it. It's not ceremonial or decorative or even medicinal. It's just hers. You sit beside her, the river cool around your ankles, and think about all the marks you haven't made yet. Later, back at the hut, she hands you a small square of linen blank, except for a single dot in the corner. This is yours, she says. You stare at it. It's for your first mark made without me, she explains. Your decision, your ink, your hand. When you know, you'll know. You nod slowly, unsure whether you're excited or terrified. She grins. Both is best. That night, you lay the linen square beside your bedroll. You don't draw on it yet, but you do stare at the corner dot until your eyes close. Because now you understand the most important marks aren't the ones people see. They're the ones you carry, quietly, carefully, like flint before a fire. Dawn arrives cloaked in gray. Not the stormy kind, just the quiet, heavy fog that rolls in from the river and swallows every edge of the landscape. You wake to the sound of water dripping from leaves and the slow creak of the herb racks swaying slightly in the damp breeze. Even the goats are subdued. You're helping dry out the pigment scrolls, laying them flat on warm stones near the fire, when the healer calls for you, with her usual economy, just your name once, from somewhere vaguely to your left. You turn and find her standing beside a stranger. She's tall, tired, eyes rimmed with weariness, and something older than sleep. She holds herself rigidly, like one shift in posture might betray the ache she's carefully hiding. She's asking for erasure, the healer says. You blink, of a tattoo. The woman nods, from another time, another healer. She shows it to you, 3 lines across her inner arm, shaped like waves, faded but still visible. The ink is clean, the work was fine, but the meaning, she explains, no longer belongs to her. It was for him, she says, and doesn't elaborate. The healer doesn't press. She never does. Instead, she begins to prepare a mixture of lemon ash, fine salt, and clay. Not to remove the tattoo that's nearly impossible, but to alter it, to soften, dull, transform. Historians still argue over whether ancient Nubians ever reversed tattoos. Physical erasure was rare, but spiritual editing. That happened. You've seen it now, marks layered over redirected, changed in shape and rhythm to reflect a life that's moved on. You prepare the new ink, deep brown, warmed with bark oil and a touch of sage, calming, rooted. The healer traces the original lines with her finger. We won't erase it, she says. We'll rewrite it. The new design builds gently over the old curved lines, softened into leaves, the wave crests dulled into petals. The 3 marks remain, but their meaning is unrecognizable now. They no longer speak of him. They speak of growth, of release, of her. You help ink the final detail, a single seed dot near the elbow, small, barely there. When the work is done, the woman looks at her arm and smiles, not wide, but real. "I'll stop hiding it now," she murmurs. The healer nods. It was never ashamed. It was just waiting. You offer her a linen wrap and a piece of fig bread. She accepts both and sits quietly for a while before heading back down the path that brought her. Later, while cleaning the thorns, you ask the healer how often she rewrites marks. Often enough, she says. The body changes. The story should too. You think about your own blank square of linen. And for the first time, you wonder not just what mark you'll make, but whether someday you'll change it too. That night, you sketch her tattoo, both versions, before and after. You label the second simply becoming. Because sometimes healing isn't about removing the past. It's about letting it bloom into something else. You wake before the sun, drawn from sleep by the quiet scrape of a stool across packed earth. The sound is so soft, it might have been your dream until you hear the unmistakable click of a pigment jar being opened. The healer is already working. A small oil lamp flickers beside her, casting long, moth-winged shadows across the walls of the hut. She's mixing something slow and deliberate, each stir a meditative motion. You don't interrupt. Instead, you ease onto the stool beside her and wait. She finally speaks. "There's someone coming today." She's marked already but wrong. You raise an eyebrow. "Bad placement," she says. "Bad intent. Done by someone who didn't listen." You've heard of this before, tattoos given by unskilled hands, careless ones, or worse marks placed to control shame or deceive. Not all ink is healing. Some is wielded like a weapon. She was told it would ease her breath, the healer continues, but it's too tight, too deep. Right over the chest. Now she says she feels like the wind won't come in. When the woman arrives, you understand immediately. She walks like she's protecting something that already hurts. Her eyes are bright but ringed with exhaustion. She breathes carefully, shallowly, as if deep air might offend whatever's settled in her ribs. She shows the mark. It's high on her sternum, dense with lines and overlapping spirals all drawn too close together. It pulses when she moves. She says it feels like pressure, like someone pressing a thumb into her. The healer nods once and begins preparing a neutralizing layer, thin pigment made with clay aloe and ash from the lightest bark you have. Its purpose is not to hide, but to calm, to quiet the skin, to say, "We hear you." You help apply it a sheer wash over the existing tattoo like a veil over shouting words. Then comes the new design. 2 arcs placed gently at the base of the ribs. Open, curved outward like wings ready to spread. Beneath them, a dot on each side, breath marks. You've seen them once before, used for singers and runners, marks that remind the body it can open. Historians still debate whether tattoos on the chest held symbolic or practical use. Some claim they aided lung conditions. Others believe they were warnings. Handle this soul gently. But here now, they feel like permission. The woman lies still as you and the healer work her breath, growing steadier with each tap. When it's done, she places her hand over the new marks and simply says, "Lighter." Not better, not fixed, just lighter. Later, as the healer soaks the thorns and you prepare tea, you ask how she knew what would help. She shrugs. You don't always know, but you can always listen. That night, under the stretched velvet of the sky, you lie on your back outside the hut and breathe deep. The stars seem softer tonight, like the universe is exhaling too. You add the pattern to your journal. Open arcs, side dots. Beneath it you write, "For breath, for undoing what was done too tightly." And above it, in smaller letters, "For listening first." Because some marks aren't just ink. They're answers to questions someone forgot to ask. The midday sun hits hard, turning every surface into something that hums. You retreat to the cool shadows near the dye jars, wrapping a wet cloth around your neck and cursing the heat under your breath. Even the flies seem slower today, bumping lazily into clay pots like they too have given up. Then you hear singing. Not from the healer's hut or the garden path, but drifting in from the upper ridge, clear, rhythmic old. You recognize the cadence even if you don't know the words. It's the funeral rhythm. Not a funeral exactly, but a remembrance. A farewell for someone who's been gone long enough to be missed, but not long enough to be forgotten. You stand slowly listening. The healer is already walking up the path, a bundle in her hands. You follow. The singer is a woman wrapped in blue, sitting alone beside a low cairn of stones. She's smoothing the top with the palm of her hand, humming something full of breath and bone. You don't ask who she's mourning. The cairn is still too new to question. The healer nods to her and kneels. You're ready. The woman nods. She unwraps her bundle. Inside is a long strip of linen. On it, sketched faintly in charcoal, is a tattoo pattern meant not for the living, but in honor of the dead, a mirror of a mark once worn by the person now beneath the cairn. She wants it placed on her left calf. So I remember to keep walking, she says, eyes wet but calm. The healer doesn't speak, she simply begins. The ink is rich today, a mixture of soot and frankincense resin, slow to dry, but luminous once set. You help stir it, careful not to breathe too deeply. The scent is both grounding and haunting. The design is simple, a diagonal line of 7 dots angled slightly like a horizon leaning into the sun. You place each one along the muscle, feeling the slight tension in the woman's leg, the way her foot flexes with memory. The 7th dot is different, larger, placed slightly apart. That was her, the woman says. The rest are me. Historians still argue over the role of mourning tattoos in Nubian culture. Some were believed to link the living to the departed, a kind of spiritual tether. Others were markers of grief, physical reminders of someone who shaped you. Some were even celebratory acknowledgments that someone mattered enough to leave a mark that needed echoing. You finish the final tap and press a warm compress against the pattern. The woman breathes deeply, then stands. She winces just once, then walks a slow circle around the cairn, humming the same tune she arrived with. Not for the one beneath the stones, but for herself. The healer watches her go, then picks up the leftover pigment and brushes her finger through it. She presses a dot onto the back of her own hand. For the ones we keep walking with, she says. You copy the design into your journal, carefully marking the 7th dot in gold ink. Below it, you write, for the ones who taught us how to stay. And just beneath that, for walking forward still remembering. That night, as the stars emerge and the heat finally breaks, you dip your foot into the river and think about everyone you've ever carried with you without realizing it. Maybe they're still walking beside you, just slower and quieter. The next morning smells like cloves. It's not the usual sharp scent of healing pastes or smudge salves. It's sweeter, deeper, mixed with something floral you can't place. The compound feels different too, tidy, expectant, like a room that's just been swept for guests no one's sure will arrive. You find the healer under the neem tree polishing a wooden bowl with the kind of focus she usually reserves for wounds or exceptionally stubborn patients. She glances up. Wedding day, she says. You blink. Hours. She snorts. Not unless you've been hiding something impressive. It turns out 2 members of a neighboring village are being joined in ceremony today, and they've come here first for blessings. And marks. Marriage tattoos. They arrive together barefoot and grinning like they know something the sun doesn't. The woman wears a sash of bright teal, the man a belt of braided reeds. Both carry small bundles of flowers and a length of linen inked with their chosen designs. The healer spreads the cloth on the ground. The patterns are mirror forms, spirals and crescents that echo each other without matching exactly. Not symmetrical, complementary. The joining is not about sameness, she says. It's about direction. She'll tattoo them one at a time, of course. Matching designs are never done simultaneously. Bad luck, she explains. The body must absorb the promise before it sees the echo. You're asked to prepare the pigment rosewood ash river, charcoal and oil of pressed date. Dark, but with a soft sheen. You mix it carefully, watching the way it clings to the spoon, like velvet. The woman goes first. Her mark begins on the inner forearm and arcs outward in a slow curve, like a falling leaf or a question mid-formed. You place each dot with care, spacing them according to the rhythm of her breath. She doesn't flinch. Her gaze is steady, as if the ink were already inside her waiting. The man watches from a respectful distance, fingers pressed lightly to his heart. When it's his turn, the curve of his design begins on the opposite arm and curves inward, a kind of mirror path. Together, the tattoos would form a circle if they ever decided to hold hands. You finish with a single shared mark, a tiny dot at the wrist, not visible from far away, but there. Historians often interpret ancient Nubian marriage tattoos as contracts, social agreements recorded in skin, but others argue they were poems, emotional commitments told in pigment, lines for love, dots for memory, spirals for trust. You clean your tools in silence while the couple sits in the shade, sipping clove tea and smiling in the same direction. They don't speak much, but you don't need them to. The marks do all the talking. That evening, after the couple has returned to their village and the sun has dipped low enough to set the dust glowing, the healer hands you a scroll. It's filled with old wedding patterns, some elaborate, some laughably strange. One includes a turtle wearing a crown. Another seems to require the couple to tattoo the soles of each other's feet. Not recommended, she murmurs. You ask if she's ever done that one. She raises her sleeve. There, faint but unmistakable, is a crowned turtle behind her ankle. Did it work, you ask? She laughs softly. Long story. Ask again when you're older. That night, you sketch the spiral design into your journal, the joined lines, the mirror curves, the quiet dot. You label it, For Love That Makes Room, and just below, for stories told in silence and promises kept in pigment. Because sometimes forever isn't shouted, it's whispered. The rain arrives like a suggestion, soft, intermittent, almost shy. It dots the packed earth in lazy patterns and turns the air thick with the scent of wet leaves and sun-warmed clay. You tilt your face upward, letting a few drops kiss your cheek, then hurry to bring in the pigment jars before the lids swell shut. Inside the hut, the healer is arranging tools for something unusual. There's no patient yet, but the look in her eyes says she's expecting one. You watch as she lays out 3 sets of thorns, 2 bowls of ink, 1 dark one, pale, and a 3rd container filled with something iridescent. You glance at the last one. What's that? Pearl ash, she replies, ground fine, for clarity. You nod like that makes sense. It doesn't, not yet. The visitor arrives just before midday, a man in his 40s, lean and sun-worn, dressed in the muted linens of someone who's seen more deserts than rivers. He carries no pack, just a bundle of cloth clutched tight to his chest. He greets the healer with a short bow. Then he unrolls the bundle. Inside are pages, dozens of them, covered in sketches, symbols, fragmented words, some faded, others bold, many clearly drawn from memory. I've been trying, he says, but my hands, they forget the angles. He explains he was once an apprentice tattooist in the north, trained briefly under a healer who vanished before teaching the full art. He's carried these scraps ever since, but age and injury have made it harder to draw. Now he wants one of his old designs never inked on anyone else to be tattooed on him, not as a healing, as a farewell. It's not for pain, he says. It's for what I never finished. The healer studies the designs in silence. Some are rough, others are stunning. She selects one shaped like a falling star, 5 lines curved into a downward spiral with a single vertical slash through the center. It's an ending, she says, but also a direction. She lets you draw it. You copy the design onto his shoulder, adjusting the arc slightly to follow the slope of the muscle. The ink is the pale mixture light as river fog softened with pearl ash. It glows faintly when wet, then settles into the skin like a whispered name. He watches your hand closely but says nothing. When you finish, he exhales deeply as if releasing a weight he didn't know he still carried. Historians rarely mention tattoos given for creative closure, for ideas that were born but never used. Yet among healers and artists, such marks are known, not practical, not ceremonial, just necessary. A punctuation mark at the end of an unspoken sentence. The man rolls up his pages carefully, hands you one without a word, and disappears into the drizzle as quietly as he came. You unroll it later. It's a design you haven't seen before, 2 lines crossing to form a compass, with a spiral off to the side like a drifting thought. You study it for a long time. The healer joins you by the hearth and says, "Not every tattoo is meant to be useful." You nod, some are just the truth. That evening, you press the gifted page into your journal and draw his star beside it. You label it for unspoken stories, for work unfinished, for letting go. Because sometimes the most healing thing you can do is mark the thing you never got to be. You're woken before dawn by the low rustle of fabric and the distinct clink of pigment jars being shifted in their baskets. For a moment, you think you're dreaming. But then the breeze brings the smell of lavender oil and wood smoke, and, something is different today. The healer is already outside, kneeling by the fire, not preparing medicine or tea, but painting. Not with thorns this time, but with a wide brush made from stiff reeds dipped in charcoal and oil. She's working on a wide swath of bark, painting a version of a tattoo. You recognize a long, winding pattern usually inked along the spine. Only now it stretches uncoiling across the bark like a serpent in motion. What is it for, you ask? She doesn't look up. For someone who cannot be touched. You wait and eventually the story unfurls. There is a woman who sends word but not herself. She has a condition one not spoken of in detail, but understood to be contagious or feared to be. She lives in isolation tended by her sister. But she has asked for a mark, not on her body. On something she can keep near it, a surrogate tattoo. The healer dips her brush again. There are times when skin is not the best canvas. Historians rarely mention this practice. Most assume tattoos were skin-bound fixed. but fragments of bark pottery, even cloth, have been found with marks believed to serve as extensions of tattooing traditions, symbolic transfers, tokens of ritual without contact. Today's design is one of protection and warmth, a pattern that mimics the spine, but instead of ending at the base, it blooms outward into a sunburst. It is meant to sit beneath her sleeping mat, to cradle her, the healer says, to remind her she is not forgotten. You're tasked with helping prepare the frame, a woven border to keep the bark from curling. As you work, the sky begins to warm, streaking rose and gold across the horizon. The final step is sealing the design with smoke. You burn a small bundle of sage-crushed lavender and dried citrus peel. The smoke curls gently over the bark, darkening the lines, setting the intention. It smells like warmth and healing and something just a little bittersweet. Later that day, the sister arrives. She bows low, accepts the bark with both hands, and presses it briefly to her forehead. No words are exchanged, only a look, deep and grateful. You watch her disappear down the path, cradling the painted mark, like it might sing if held too tightly. That evening, you sit beside the fire, replaying the movements of the brush, the way the healer's hand curved in rhythm, the way the smoke seemed to linger where it was needed most. You draw the pattern into your journal, spine-curved sunburst smoke curling along the edge, and label it. For those we cannot reach, and beneath it, for healing at a distance, for presence without pressure, for care beyond skin. Because some of the most powerful tattoos never touch the body at all. The air is heavy with dust and sunlight. It's been dry for days, and the cracked clay around the compound crunches faintly beneath your sandals as you walk. Even the herbs look sleepy, curling their edges toward the shadows. Inside the hut, the healer is rolling out the scroll of pigment diagrams you've come to know by heart. Except this time, she stops at a page you've never seen. One covered in patterns that look more like constellations than tattoos. Tiny stars, lines connecting them, clusters in odd shapes. These, she says, are for direction. You glance up. Travelers. She nods, but not of the physical kind. A girl is arriving today, no older than 12, quiet with a voice like dry papyrus. Her parents describe her as drifting, not ill, not hurt, just distant. Her eyes wander. Her speech loops back on itself. She forgets to eat, but remembers dreams in perfect detail. She follows stars, her mother says, half worried, half proud. The healer has seen this before. Some people are born between places, she murmurs. Their feet stay here, but their thoughts don't. The girl arrives wrapped in soft wool, clutching a carved wooden figure, a goddess with one eye. She won't let go of it. You offer her water, and she nods but doesn't speak. She's not here for curing. She's here for anchoring. The tattoo will be placed on the inside of her wrist, where she can see it, trace it, remember it. It's a constellation pulled from an old sky map. 5 dots in a slanted W crossed by a single line that represents the path home. It's not a real star cluster, but it could be. It's more about metaphor than astronomy. You prepare the ink light blue this time, softened with fig milk and eucalyptus ash. Cool, gentle, not too dark. This isn't a declaration. It's a touchstone. As the healer tattoos, the girl watches every movement. She doesn't flinch. Her breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the thorn. When the final mark is placed, she finally speaks. It looks like the thing I dream about. Neither of you ask what that thing is. You wrap her wrist gently and she holds it like something just born. Her mother watches, tearful, but quiet. Historians rarely recognize tattoos like this, non-functional, non-ritual, non-medical. But you've come to know their value. Some call them tether tattoos, marks to keep someone from floating too far. Not leashes, just reminders, coordinates. As the girl and her family leave, the healer presses the scroll into your hands. These, she says, are for those who live in the in-between. That night, you add the pattern to your journal, 5 dots, 1 line, a small note in the margin. For wanderers, for dreamers, for the stars behind the eyes. And just below that, for when the world feels too much like sky. Because not all tattoos are for healing pain. Some are for helping you stay. The final day arrives quietly without ceremony or instruction. Just the gentle creak of reed mats underfoot and the smell of warm stone as the sun rises higher than it needs to. You move slowly, aware of everything, the weight of the linen wrap around your shoulders, the familiar scratch of charcoal beneath your thumbnail, the tiny squeak your sandals make when you stop too suddenly on dry earth. Today the healer doesn't call you. You find her in the usual place by the outer wall where shade stretches the longest, and she's waiting with 2 thorns, 2 bowls, and your blank linen square. You ready? She asks, not as a question, but as a gift. You don't answer, you just sit. The square is unfolded between you. The dot in the corner, her dot stares up like a patient teacher. She gives you 1 bowl. You recognize the ink instantly, the soft brown made with bark ash and clove, the one used for grounding, for remembering, for beginnings. You breathe deeply, letting the scent settle into your chest. Your first mark is not for someone else. It's for you. The healer doesn't tell you what to draw. She doesn't guide your hand or ask what hurts. She simply watches as you place the thorn against your own skin just beneath the collarbone, where the breath gathers before speech. You mark a line. Then a second curving downward. You let it become a crescent, not the moon, your own version. Open, incomplete, enough. Historians will never catalog this one. It's too small, too personal. There's no record of it in temple scrolls or palace murals. But here under the sun, with your teacher beside you and the earth warm beneath your knees, it matters more than anything. Because this mark means I was here. And even more importantly, I am still becoming. The healer smiles softly. She doesn't need to say anything. You can feel her pride in the way she hands you a strip of cloth to wrap the mark. You do it yourself. Your hands don't shake. Later, as the compound begins to stir with the rustle of breakfast and morning gossip, you sit by the fire pit and sketch your tattoo into your journal. It's smaller than the others, but beside it, you write, for arrival, for presence, for the beginning of knowing. And at the very bottom of the page in quiet ink. First one mine, not the last. That evening, you walk the garden path one more time. You touch the neem tree. You nod to the sleeping goat. You pause by the water jars and the fire basin and the spot where the pigment scrolls hang to dry. The healer watches you, arms folded. You'll come back, she says. It's not a question or a command, just a truth. And in your bones, you feel it too. Now the sky is soft again, like linen soaked in dusk. The stars blink slowly to life, not in a hurry, not in any particular order. You sit beneath them, with the hush of day still clinging to your skin, the echo of old stories vibrating somewhere just beneath your ribs. The air has changed lighter somehow, like something important has been released, or perhaps welcomed. Around you the night settles gently. No wind, just the hum of unseen insects, the lazy creak of dry wood, and the slow cooling of sun-warmed stone beneath your legs. You press your fingers to the mark just below your collarbone. Still warm, still yours. Let that be the thought you drift to, now not the ink or the tools or even the healer's knowing smile, but the feeling of choosing, of tracing your own rhythm, of stepping quietly and with purpose into a story that holds you gently without rushing, without needing you to be anyone but the version of yourself that's ready to rest. The mark doesn't need to be big. It just needs to mean something to you. So close your eyes now. Let the night fold over you like linen. Let the weight of your body ease into the earth, into your bed, into the space you've made for yourself. And if your dreams are full of spirals and dots and softly humming stars, know that somewhere a healer smiles and knows you've begun.